My name is Jess Berg. Like Jeanette said, I am an occupational therapy student from Washington University in St. Louis. And yes, I'm completing my doctoral capstone component at ASF remotely in Michigan. So that has been a great experience, very interesting, but it's a wonder what telehealth and virtual medicine can do and how it's progressing in this pandemic. So without further ado, I've been creating programming for individuals at ASF, specifically caregivers, and this is a product of some of that programming that I want to share with all of you guys today. And this presentation is called Navigating Role Changes as a Caregiver Post-Stroke. Uh-oh, there we go. All right, so before we kind of dive into everything, I want to go over some learning objectives or things that I hope that you all get out of today's presentation. So I want caregivers to be familiar with the different types of role changes post-stroke within a family. I want caregivers to be able to understand the impact role changes post-stroke have on family dynamics and relationships. I want caregivers to understand how to address the role changes post-stroke appropriately and constructively. And then also for caregivers to be familiar with ways to mitigate negative aspects of role changes post-stroke. Sorry, I'm working on two screens, so bear with me. So family role changes come in all shapes and form. They could be between spouses, between children and parent, between siblings, or even between friends that may not be exactly in the family unit but are considered family. So as I'm sure you've all experienced, when someone you love has a stroke, everybody in the family has a stroke. Everyone is impacted by the aftermath of this event. So not only are you as caregivers transitioning into this caregiver role, or most of you already have, but your child or your spouse or your parent is also transitioning to this care recipient role. So it's a lot to get used to in such a short time period. The onset of stroke is very sudden, and it's not anything anyone can really prepare for, unlike a chronic illness or anything that has progressed over time, such as dementia, where you have time to plan and prepare for the changes. Stroke is a very sudden onset and can catch people off guard and kind of throw everything into a whirl. So kind of the first dyad I'm going to talk about, and when I say dyad, it's just the caregiver and the care recipient, whoever that might be, is the child parent and those role changes that come about with that dynamic. So this is when a child becomes, or an adult child becomes, a caregiver to their parent after stroke. So before we kind of get started, so role shifts, role changes, and role reversals are seen in the literature. They all kind of mean the same thing. Role reversals, we try to stay away from because you're not really reversing roles, you're just stepping into a different role. So you're still a child, you're still a parent, you're still a spouse, but some of those roles within those roles might be changing. And so these can be really, really taxing on that child-parent relationship, an adult child taking care of their parent. Authority shifts are very common with this role shift between the parent and the child, especially that now the child may be taking care of the home management, the finances, and other tasks for their parents that their parents have been used to taking care of for many, many years on their own. So this can cause a lot of disagreements and turmoil, not just in between the adult child and the parent, but also maybe their siblings or their other parent, the spouse to whoever had the stroke. Also, with lack of proper supports, either from siblings, parents, spouses, whoever that may be your support system, if they're not giving those adequate supports or being helpful during this time, this can cause a lot of decreased quality of life and burden on that sole caregiver. So it's really important to make sure that you're reaching out to your loved ones and you're having them be in the loop of what's going on in the caregiving sector of your life and your loved one's life so they can provide as much help as you need. All right, so I don't know if any of you are familiar, but this particular generation, the adult child who are taking care of their parents, this is called the sandwich generation. So it's basically, you think of yourself as being sandwiched between taking care of your parents, but you also may be taking care of your own children at the time too. So it could be you're sandwiched between those two roles of being a parent and being a caregiver to your parent. So in this particular role in the literature, typically they find that daughters are the ones that are taking care of their parents the most, but that's not always the case. Sons are definitely there taking care of their parents too, but a lot of the literature surrounds daughters' experiences with this type of care. So research has sort of shown that people in this role are prioritizing caregiving over their role as a spouse or their role as a parent, which can be really detrimental in a lot of aspects of your life. So we really want to emphasize that it's important to have a nice kind of caregiving life balance. So you know how you hear the work-life balance, you want to have that caregiving life balance. So you're still paying adequate time to fulfilling those other roles and being present for your children and your spouse, as well as your parent too. So it's kind of difficult to manage those roles, but with some tips and tricks that I'll share, hopefully that'll be helpful and easier moving forward. So a lot of these things that these adult children are losing while they're kind of getting engulfed in that role of caregiving is that, like I said, the relationship with their partner or their children, leisure time, volunteering, having fun, going out and meeting their friends, coffee dates, stuff like that. And then also employment as well. With this population, it's very, very common that you see shifts in employment and how much they're working. So the shift in employment, which I'm sure some of you may have experienced before, is there is a significant financial burden. If you have to give up your work hours, you have to work less because you're caregiving for your parent, or you might even lose your job altogether because this caregiving role may be so demanding. So there's a lot of negative job-related consequences when it comes to caregiving. Those higher rates of absences, illnesses, and tardiness, that can be really detrimental to that as well. Luckily, there is a push for more flexible work arrangements. There are laws out there that protect those that are caregivers and working at the same time. They just make you jump through a lot of hoops, but there definitely are resources out there if that is something that you are struggling with. There's paid supports for caregivers that are in the workforce too. Those are just a click away on the internet if you search that. So sort of some tips for adult children caregivers in this role that researchers and scientists have seen in the literature. This can also apply to really any role. It doesn't have to be just this particular dyad. But definitely you want to practice compassion in this role. You want to take on this role compassionately. For a lot of your parents, they spent a great deal of their life caring for you and making sure that you were taken care of and your needs were put first when you were children. However, remember that your parents are not children. Sometimes when you step into the role of caregiver and you are a parent yourself, those roles kind of intertwine, and you might be speaking to your parent as you might a child, which is not appropriate and might cause a lot more hurt than it does good. I know people want to do what's best for their parent and they may not even realize they are talking to them that way, but just keeping that in the forefront of your mind is important. Try to frame your reasoning for assisting them in their day-to-day lives as more of you want to give back to them because they gave so much to you, or you want to help them because they helped you throughout your life, and less so that kind of you are incapable of caring for yourself. So trying to stay away from that wording. Also, your parents are grappling with a lot of loss post-stroke. They have had their independence swiftly taken away from them. A lot of people post-stroke or pre-stroke, are very independent, are living on their own, and then immediately in just one acute onset of stroke, they now need a lot of help from outside sources. So make sure you're bringing them into that care conversation, you're making sure they're involved in their own care if they can be, and you're being really compassionate when it comes to this role. I know it can be very difficult and trying at times to keep that compassion at the forefront of your mind. It's okay to be frustrated, to be sad, to be angry about this event, but just try to take some deep breaths and focus on the positives too. So focus on those positives together. While it was not either of your plans, I'm sure, to be the caretaker of your parent so soon or under these circumstances, try to think about the increased time that you're spending together and maybe some new memories that you can create together while you kind of work through these changes and develop new skills and overcome these challenges that are presented in your life. Also, it's really important for adult children to create a support system for both themselves and your parents as well. So this could be like paid caregivers coming in and helping, that respite care option. It could be neighbors coming in and helping, your siblings, your spouse could also be coming in and helping as well. And with this generation particularly, your parent might be moving into the house with you, but they also might be living on their own too. So you're kind of going back in between two households. So you kind of have two households to manage at this point in your life. So making sure you're bringing your spouse into this equation as well. Keep them in the loop for what's going on with your parent, and maybe they can pick up some extra roles such as homemaking or financial things and your own household. That way you have less things on your plate while you are adjusting to this caregiving role. Okay. And then how to establish healthy roles as an adult child taking care of your parent. So it's really, really important to have those honest conversations with your loved one and make sure that you're both on the same level playing field. Like I had kind of mentioned, when you're in that child-parent dynamic, your parent still might see you as their child and someone who is not in the right to tell them how they should live their lives even after this event has happened. So it's really important that you're both on the same level playing field and you're both speaking to each other as adults in these conversations, or else the point might not get across well, or advice or recommendations might not be followed through by your loved one. So also it's important to take time for yourself. So that means you can say no sometimes. It's okay to say no. I know it's kind of scary to say no to your parents sometimes. Trust me, I know that. I don't like to say no to my parents either, but it's okay to say no sometimes and ask for outside help with certain roles, so you're not getting engulfed in every single caregiving role. You don't have to do every single thing for your parent. Paid caregivers or siblings or your spouse can come in and help, so you can have that time to yourself to take time for self-care and making sure you're not having a decreased quality of life or increased burden because you're trying to take on all these roles by yourself. Also, it's really important to have a deep respect for one another. Again, that level playing field, you're both adults in this situation, and it's really important to respect each other's opinions and ideas. And also, I want you all to take good care of yourself. When I say take good care of yourself, yes, that's self-care activities too, but that's also taking care of your own needs and your health too. Health is really important as a caregiver. You want to keep up to date on those things. You want to make sure you're attending your own doctor's appointments. Don't put those by the wayside. Make sure you're taking your prescribed medications. Make sure you are getting enough sleep. That's very, very important. And that self-care too. You can't pour from an empty cup. So it's really important to take good care of yourself and take that time for yourself in this role to establish a healthy role to kind of decrease that burden and increase that quality of life. Also in this role, you want to avoid secrets and guilt trips. These are never fun, especially between a parent and a child or any relationship really. You want to make sure that you're openly communicating and being very upfront with one another, but in a tactful way. You all are absolutely amazing at what you do. You may not feel like you're amazing at what you do, but stepping into that caregiving role says a lot about a person in a positive light. So just at this stage in your life, if you are an adult child taking care of your parent, just remember that you're not alone. You have resources out there. Definitely recruit your spouse, your siblings for extra help or assistance, and never feel like you're alone. There's lots of resources out there. All right, this next dyad I'm going to be talking about is that spousal partner and those role shifts that come with that dyad. So this is probably the most commonly researched in the literature. So there's lots of resources and articles out there that talk specifically about this certain relationship and the role shifts that often occur with this. All right, so spousal role changes or partner role changes can come in a lot of variety of different ways. So Spouses take on new roles along with roles they already possess post-stroke. So this can cause a lot of disagreement between spouses as well as other family members. A lot of you, I'm sure, have been married for decades. And so you're very, probably pre-stroke, you were very set in some of these roles and very comfortable in them. And when the acute onset of stroke occurs, it can be really, really difficult to shift into new roles that you might have not been comfortable or might not have partaken in prior to the stroke. So some of these things could be shifts in homemaking responsibilities, and then changes in who manages the finances. These are seen as some of the most prevalent role shifts in spouses and partners post-stroke. Also, there is sexuality and intimacy issues that come post-stroke as well. With those physical and mental changes that arise post-stroke, this can also be something that is pretty common after an event like this. And so marital issues also arise. Whether you've been married for a few years or decades, there can always be marital issues that arise post-stroke just because of all the change that's going on. So a study actually looked at the short-term relationships, so less than 5 years, and those are typically more jeopardized post-stroke than those who have been together for 10 plus years. And this was seen as I'm sure it's seen a lot. It's not always the case, but most people who have only been married for 5 years or so are in their 20s and 30s, are still very young, and the individuals who have had a stroke are afraid that they are holding their loved one back. And so divorces happen because of that, but they also happen because it is such a short time and they haven't really built that connection that some of, or those of you that have been together for a long time have. It's also common that spouses feel like they are living with a stranger. This is commonly seen in the literature to be cited by caregivers because of the cognitive and behavioral issues that are present post-stroke. But always what I have said and what the literature says is very helpful is try to remember that it's the stroke talking, it's not your loved one. That's not necessarily they're not trying to be manipulative or mean or whatever is going on. It's the neurological complications, not them. I know it can be very difficult because part of the reason, not just because of looks, but for personality is why you marry a person and decide to spend the rest of your life with them. And that can be drastically changed post-stroke. So it could be very, very difficult and cause some conflict too. So the relationship of marriage post-stroke, this is something that is pretty heavily studied in the literature. It's actually a protective mechanism too. Research has kind of found that those that are married or in a long-term relationship have the greatest predictor of positive health and longevity in those with chronic illnesses, not just stroke, but other chronic illnesses too. They seem to have better physical, emotional, behavioral, and mental outcomes post-stroke than those that do not have these types of relationships. Those that are seen to have the most success with the role changes are seen to have quality and effective communication styles with one another. So again, that open, honest conversation and communication is key. And then post-stroke couples are also reconstructing their roles and identities in their marriage and within themselves. So like I had kind of said, if you've been married for decades, you may have already had those roles kind of set in stone. And then post-stroke, you're kind of thrown in a whirl and you're trying to figure out who's going to fill which role and which roles can I get back and which roles do I need to leave behind. So this is something that having good communication with your spouse and with others too is very important and can actually help you in the long run with these role changes and stepping into them with confidence. Couples who were able to maintain that delicate balance between avoiding topics to protect a partner's self-esteem and frank discussions about their situation in ways that preserve their partner's self-esteem were more satisfied post-stroke with their marriage. So being very tactful about how you're having those honest conversations and making sure you are taking into account each other's feelings. That can be very difficult. It can be a frustrating and upsetting situation, but just trying to keep calm and be tactful in those conversations is very important. Also talking openly about what is going on, their prognosis and what they will be seeing, which you'll probably get that information from your doctors if you haven't already gotten that, it's associated with better management and higher quality of marriages too, being open that, hey, this is the prognosis, this is what's going on, this is what we should expect, instead of kind of trying to beat around the bush and not talk to them about those things and just try to keep living your life like you were before. That's not going to be as beneficial, and it might cause more harm in the long run. And then we also, like I had mentioned, that sexuality and intimacy part of a marriage or a relationship can be impacted by these changes post-stroke as well. So those shifts in roles. Typically, when you think of kind of that intimacy, people think of like a sexual relationship. However, the feelings of intimacy can be achieved by things that are not necessarily seen as sexual, which could be physical touch, like just brushing someone's shoulder, having your hand on their shoulder, holding hands, kind of having those nice, deep conversations, acts of service, making sure you're going out of your way to do things for one another, or just partaking in activities that you both enjoy. Those are all intimate settings, and that's how you can achieve intimacy too. There are also specialists and professionals who can help you establish a safe and healthy sex life as well. Occupational therapists actually happen to be one of those professionals. So we are trained to remediate skills and modify the environment so that way you can have a safe and fulfilling sex life. So really just reach, if that's something that you're interested in and you're struggling with, it's nothing to ever be ashamed about talking to a health professional about. We definitely are educated on these things, and we would be more than happy to help if that's something that you're interested in. All right, and then with this certain dyad, how to establish healthy roles. Again, these are tips and tricks for anybody in any dyad, but in the literature, these were seen to be the most beneficial for this particular dyad. So as I have this little triangle, so at the bottom you have respect, appreciation, then recognition, support, gratitude, which all culminates into love. So you kind of need all those building blocks to be able to achieve that end goal of a healthy, productive, good love. So when we're talking about ways to establish the healthy roles, you want to embrace the role changes. I know that can be really, really difficult when you may have been set in your ways prior to the stroke, but really embracing those role changes, individuals who have been seen in the literature to do that see better outcomes in the long run. It can be extremely scary and hard to jump into these roles. It's something you're unfamiliar with. It's something that you may have never done before. But with the help of your spouse and outside support, jumping into these roles and really embracing the change will help you have a stronger relationship with your loved one, who you're caring for, as well as other people in the family throughout the caregiving process. And it will increase your quality of life and your health outcomes as well. It can be really difficult to rethink the meaning of your relationship in the context of disability, but I'm sure a lot of you guys have had to think about that in the context of disability, and it can be really difficult, but really if you're embracing these changes and you're embracing the new role that you're in, and maybe embracing old roles too, making sure you're bringing them into the equation too, that's going to be really important to your happiness and how well you do with the caregiving role and your quality of life in general. It's also important to communicate effectively and regularly, making sure that you're having conversations with one another and as well as those who are also partaking in care is really, really important regarding your own well-being and your loved ones. So you want to make sure that you're telling people, healthcare professionals, outside caregivers, friends and family, not just how your loved one is doing, but how you're doing too. It's very important that you are being heard and that your needs and wants are being met as well, because your health and well-being is very much connected to your loved one's health and well-being too, and their ability to live the best life that they can live as well. Also, don't be afraid. Again, I've said this many times, don't be afraid to ask for help. You're never alone in this situation, and don't ever be ashamed to ask for help. It takes a village, and it really is something that is beneficial for you in the long run, as well as your loved one too. In this particular role, it can be very difficult, or I guess dyad, it can be very difficult because you and your spouse have probably lived together for decades prior to needing any help from anyone. So it's really hard to bring somebody else into your home, but just kind of letting go, having that time for yourself, knowing that your loved one is taken care of is really important for your own well-being and happiness in life. So it's also important to take time for yourself. Again, that self-care aspect is really, really important to avoid that role engulfment and overall dissatisfaction with your role as a caregiver. And lastly, it's really important that you continue to grow in your marriage and relationship. Relationships are always growing and always changing. And especially post-stroke, this will be something that is very prevalent in your life. So it's always going to be changing and growing in your day-to-day lives. Make sure that you are keeping your own well-being and your loved ones at the forefront during these changing circumstances, but change is not always a bad thing. Change can be a good thing too. All right, the next dyad I'm going to be talking about is the parents as caregivers to adult children role shifts. So this is a interesting one. It's not very much studied as it would be the other roles. This is less common than you would see a spouse caring for their loved one or their other spouse, or you would see a adult child caring for their parents. This is not as researched as the other dyads have been. However, there is some research out there regarding this certain dyad. Okay. So like I had said, this is a very under-researched population. So a lot of the research that has been seen with this particular dyad is sort of the pediatric stroke population, so children having strokes and then their parents being caregivers for them when they are children still. And that is very, very different than when you are a parent that's a caregiver to your adult child. Your adult child has probably already gone out into the world and forged their own life, and they're very independent and autonomous, and then this event happens and they may move back into the home, or you may be caring for them in more of a capacity than they would like. So this can be a very, very difficult role to be in for a lot of caregivers and care recipients who are part of this population. So this demographic, unfortunately, is becoming a lot more common in the world as people are experiencing strokes younger and younger. This can be attributed to substance abuse, people having strokes because of substance abuse issues. It can also be from the research recently has been looking at the way our diets are now. So a lot of young people aren't taking care of themselves or not eating well, and all of this processed food is causing issues that are ending up leading to these medical complications such as stroke. So there is research present on adult children with other disabilities being cared for by their parents as they transition to adulthood, but again, less so on these parents as caregivers of adult children post-stroke. But from what I did find, this particular dynamic can have a strong existential component, which I'm sure is probably true for any of the other dyads, just much more so this one. So as you're a parent and your adult child, they're always going to be your children, regardless of how old they are. They're always going to be your babies, but it can be difficult because there's a possibility, because of these medical complications, that they may pass before you pass. But then there's also the flip side, where you may pass before they pass, and then who's going to take care of your child that has suffered a stroke and needs this extra care. So for this population, it's very important that you have a plan going forward, that you have things in place in case this happens, just to ease your mind and to make sure that you know that your loved one is being taken care of after you may be gone. So with this particular dynamic, this is probably the most difficult dynamic to establish healthy roles in, because as a parent taking care of your adult child, they were probably out in the world, like I said, being very autonomous. They had a job, probably maybe a family. They were living alone. They may have lived in different states. Whatever may have been the case, they were very much on their own, thriving in life. And so in the research that has been conducted that I found about this particular population, you really want to treat your adult child as an adult. So it can be very difficult to, or easy to revert back to the role of I'm the parent, you're the child. Just like it can be that same way with you're an adult child taking care of a parent. You can very easily slip back into those roles, and that's something that we don't want to do. We want to keep that even playing field, that you're both adults and that you're both having these adult conversations, because you're both adults in this situation. So like I had said, they have lost autonomy at a young age. Quite a few individuals are having strokes in their early 20s even, or in their 30s or 40s, and their parents are becoming their sole caretakers. And again, they are losing possibly their job, their family, their home, all of these things that they have worked their whole lives to achieve, and it has now being stripped away from them in a blink of an eye because stroke is such a sudden onset. So it's an adjustment for both of you, and it's okay to have strong emotions about it and to get upset about it. Just make sure when you are having honest and open conversations, you come back to that middle and you are talking calmly and presently and to both of you like you are adults in an adult conversation. So you want your adult child to be very present and active in their choices in their life too. You still want to give them autonomy as much as possible. And you want to be understanding of one another and each other's needs, because you're both going to have different needs in this role. So both of you being very open and honest with each other is important. Again, like I said, really avoid reverting back to those old roles, that parent versus child dynamic. It can be extremely difficult, as seen in the literature, for that to take place. But just keeping that in the forefront of your mind, that you're both adults in this role, is really important. Also, creating a mutual, something you mutually enjoy, create mutual enjoyment. So this could be doing something that you used to do when you were younger, or this could be just a great bonding experience for you both to try something new as well, something that you can both talk about and converse about, because sometimes when your child grows up and they leave the house and then they come back because you're the main caretaker, their life has changed drastically and it may be completely different from what they did as children. So maybe interacting in a more adult-like activity would be important for them too, so they can feel like they have a connection and something to talk about with you. Also create spaces for yourself and your child. It's really important that you take time away from the care recipient from time to time. Let them kind of have their own space and you have your own space too. That way you're not on top of each other all the time, and that's not causing any disagreement or resentment towards one another. Also, again, with this population too, with this dyad, don't be afraid to ask for help. Make sure you're taking care of yourself, you're reaching out, you're having someone else kind of come in and take on some of the roles, so you're not getting engulfed in this caregiving role, and you're still taking time to partake in those other roles that you enjoy, like being a spouse, an employer, or an employee, or just a volunteer, anything that might bring enjoyment and fulfillment to your life. All right, so family role changes often lead to family conflict, which I'm sure a lot of you probably have experienced post-stroke. So it's extremely common. Most everyone has it. It's not something that is seen as just like a blip on the radar. It's like a whole big commotion on the radar. But there can be a big discrepancy between expectations of family members. And when I say this, I mean that there can be a big discrepancy between what the healthcare provider is telling the person with stroke and the main caregiver than what somebody who is not involved in care as often or not involved in care at all might expect the outcome to be. So family members who are not often around your loved one may not know that the extent of their physical disability or emotional behavioral disability. It could be something that they're not used to. So kind of having that open conversation with your loved ones prior to bringing them into this new situation would be pretty important, kind of to aid in that smooth transition from pre-stroke to post-stroke with family members as well. I actually did a very short, it was about 10-minute video on ways to diffuse family conflict in each of the dyads. So kind of how to have a smoother transition from pre-stroke to post-stroke with your family members and your loved one. So I'll share some general tips that are from that particular presentation, but feel free to go check it out. That link's on there. It's only about 10 minutes and it kind of goes over some of the ways to diffuse that conflict between spouses, between parent and child, both ends, and as well as if you're a parent, how to kind of involve your children in the caregiving process as well in a healthy way. So for general tips on how to diffuse this family conflict that might arise because of the role changes that are happening in the family between you and your loved one, as well as those who may not be exactly in that caregiver dyad. These are just some brief kind of easy ways to have a smoother transition, like I was saying. So one of the first ways to diffuse or prevent that family conflict is to identify what the issue is. What is the issue that you are having between the caregiver, care recipient, or if you're the caregiver talking to a sibling or your spouse or whoever might not be the main caregiver. So make sure you're identifying what the issue is first before you're going into this conversation, so that is at the forefront of everybody's mind. Once that is identified, you want to be very honest, be very candid with your feelings, make sure that the issue that you identified is being clearly explained and how you feel about the issue, in which you possibly may need to resolve the issue as well. So it's okay to be sad, confused, stressed, frustrated in these conversations. Just make sure that you are calmly telling the other person, this is how I feel, this is the issue, and this is how I think it should be resolved. What are your thoughts? So once you have that feeling identified, you're being honest, and you're talking over with that person, try to avoid using I statements. So when I say an I statement, avoid placing blame on others and creating that increased tension. Making sure that when you're also having this conversation that you're valuing everyone's ideas and opinions. You may not necessarily always agree with their ideas and opinions, but making sure that you're open and you're kind of trying to see their ideas and opinions from their point of view as well. You want to make sure that you're seeing everybody's ideas and point of views from each direction and angle. That way you can get a full picture. It's also important that in this, you're actively listening to. Make sure that you're taking in what they're saying. And this needs to be true for both parties. Both parties need to be actively listening. We don't want to jump in or not take in what the other person's saying and cause even more tension and turmoil to erupt. Another thing that could be considered is counseling. Having a third party actively listen to what's going on for you and your care partner is really, really important. You can both approach and resolve issues easier this way. For example, if you are, say, an adult child taking care of your parent post-stroke and you are just not getting through to them, like nothing you are saying, they still view you as their child, they're not going to do anything you say, kind of getting a third party involved is pretty important. It doesn't necessarily have to be a counselor. It could be a social worker or another healthcare professional, but sometimes it's really important for people to hear something from a third party before they will actually go through with that recommendation or advice that is given to them. We don't always want to listen to our family members, and that's just how it is sometimes. Also, role overload is extremely common with caregivers. Caregivers try to take on too much of the world and too much of the caregiving responsibilities, and while that is so admirable and great, it can cause a lot more issues than it does good. So making sure that you're sharing responsibility with others and you're creating a caregiving team instead of just you individually as a caregiver. And when I say a team, this can be anywhere from 2 to however many people that you want involved in your loved one's care, but also making sure that you're all on the same page for that care too. You can definitely be the head person for that. Just make sure you're communicating with everyone and you're sharing that responsibility evenly so you all feel like you are getting the most out of the caregiving experience, as well as still taking time for yourself and caring for yourself as well. All right, also, there's a couple more too for how to diffuse conflict after role changes post-stroke. So first, blame the disease, not the person. Remember that stroke itself is causing these personality and behavioral changes like I had kind of talked about before. It's not your loved one trying to be mean or malicious or anything. It's really these changes that are happening to them neurologically that are causing them to act the way that they are. So just try to keep that in the forefront of your mind. Also, taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture is important sometimes when conflict arises. We can get caught up in small and trivial problems sometimes instead of focusing on the bigger picture and the goals that we might want to achieve. So it's just important to kind of look at that bigger picture and make sure we're keeping that in mind. Also, as a caregiver, it's important to build in those rest breaks, like I was saying, taking care of yourself. So that respite care is important too. In the handout that will be given after this webinar is over, I actually included tips on how to pay for respite care, as well as some websites where you can find respite care in your area as well as support groups too. I have support groups on there for your area, and especially because of COVID right now, there are also a lot of those that are online too. So that might be helpful between online forums, online Zoom groups, and even Facebook groups as well are on there. It's also important, like I was saying, to actively listen when you are having conversations with individuals about conflict that might be arising. So paying attention to body language is really important. Try not to interrupt the other party's ideas or concerns before they have said everything. And don't try to judge someone based on their body language too. They might just be uncomfortable in the situation, or they might not be used to opening up about whatever they are that is, or whatever it is that is causing them to have this internal or external conflict going on. So making sure that when you're actively listening, you're waiting for everyone to finish what they are saying until you jump in, and making sure you're taking in what they're saying too. I think a lot of times that we kind of tune out in our mind what someone is saying because we're coming up with a rebuttal in our mind. We're trying to figure out what we're going to say next. So try to avoid that and really take in to the full extent what they are saying, and then form your rebuttal and then move forward. So also we want to make sure that we are having scheduled times to communicate. It can be really difficult to try to communicate when you're in the middle of a heated argument. Or if you're in the middle of an issue, or just not altogether there to really sit down and take time to talk about what is going on. So those scheduled times to communicate with your loved one, your care recipient, and anybody else who really is in your life or is part of that care team is really important, because when you are in a calmer state, a more relaxed state, you're probably more mentally prepared to talk about whatever it might be that is causing conflict. All right. And then just some kind of closing remarks. So change is hard. I cannot imagine what type of change goes on in all of your lives post-stroke. It has got to be immense, and it can be very frustrating, sad, overwhelming, and it is totally okay to feel those emotions. No one should ever tell you that you shouldn't feel that way, because that is completely normal. And it takes a while. Change does not happen overnight. It is something that is a process. So just making sure that you are keeping that in the forefront of your mind, that it's a process and it's not something that changes overnight, and just to be kind to yourself and to your loved one, and know that things will get smoothed out. It's just going to take some time. Also, I've said this again and again and again, and I'll keep saying it, make sure you're asking for assistance and guidance throughout this process and these role changes. Whether you have been a caregiver for a couple months or for decades now, it is still important that you're asking for assistance and guidance, so that way you're not getting engulfed in this role and you're taking time for yourself. Taking care of yourself is extremely important. In the last webinar I had talked about how intertwined the health of the care recipient and the caregiver is. So if you're doing well as the caregiver and you're thriving in life and your health is good and your mental health is good, the same is going to go for the caregiver or the care recipient typically. You guys are very entwined in how your health outcomes are. Also, make sure that you appreciate yourself in this role, and make sure you're taking time to spend in other roles you enjoy too. So making sure you're making time to be a spouse, to be a parent, to be a friend, anything that might bring you joy and satisfaction. Make sure you're still taking part in those roles in your life, even though you might have taken on new roles or roles you may not be experienced with. So I know all of you have experienced a lot of these role changes that I've talked about, and it's a very permanent and sudden role change too. So making sure that you are being flexible for yourself, adaptable, and stepping into these new roles is really important, like I had talked about. You're all amazing individuals for doing what you're doing and taking care of your loved one. That takes a lot of strength, resilience, and immense compassion to be a caregiver. And so I just want to applaud all of you guys for that. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful endeavor. So as I'm closing, these are the references that I used. And then, so I just want to thank you guys all for your time. Right now, I will take any questions or comments that anyone has. I'd like to kind of facilitate an open conversation with everyone. So if we run out of questions or comments, I have prepared some discussion questions for us. But I want it not to just be me answering questions and comments, but for anybody in the group to chime in as well, because you guys are all much more experienced in this than I am.
Thank you, Jess. This is Jeanette, and I forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. Jess, if you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and then I will also stop recording. Thanks. Okay. And just so folks know, I am going to stop the recording, and that way questions and discussions, well, they can be private. They don't have to be part of all this. So let me